Welcome to this, which is session 4 of this series on teachings on considering Jesus. And in this session, what I want to talk about is the idea of religion and science, or another way of saying it is God and science. Because see, traditionally we've been taught that if you believe in science, then, well, religion is not something that necessarily meshes with science. Many times we have been raised to believe that science is hard, factual. It's things for which we have evidence. It's like this item here, I can see it, I can feel it, I can taste it, and I can touch it. Whereas when we get into the realm of religion, well, there's no proof for that. And that's why I say I believe that we've been conditioned to believe that science and religion, or natural way of looking at the world and the spiritual way of seeing the world, they're opposed. And I don't believe that that necessarily is true. I believe that if in fact science is true and religion is true, then they must mesh. They must reinforce each other. Religion, we've been told, is full of myths, that there's not evidence for it. Whereas science, we're told that, we can empirically test it. We can, measure it. And so I believe, again, as I said, that we've been kind of conditioned with this wrong thinking. But here's a series of 4 questions that I think that we need to ask ourselves. Number 1, must science and religion necessarily be at war with each other? Must they be opposed? Is there another way of viewing these two? Another question I have is, does the science-minded person need to avoid a religious or a spiritual mindset? And then a third question is there a different way to view the relationship between the spiritual realm and science? And I believe there is. And then the last question is, does the latest scientific evidence seem to reinforce a spiritual worldview? So now what I want to talk about is science and religion from the historical perspective. I think it's something that we have to consider. It's something that most of us really have not been taught about, because I don't believe it's necessary that science and the spiritual worldview, or a religious worldview, or what we might even say a view of a creator or a designer, are necessarily opposed. In fact, the majority of the scientific evidences and breakthroughs that we have historically are because of religious or spiritually minded men. Some of the greatest thinkers of all scientific history, for instance, Nicholas Copernicus, he lived in 1473 to 1543. He was Polish, and he was an astronomer, and he demonstrated through arithmetic that the planets go around the sun. So here's Copernicus, that the religious world at one time believed the world was flat and that the sun revolved around the earth, and then along comes a religious man and he proved scientifically that that wasn't true. Also, we have Sir Francis Bacon. Sir Francis Bacon was a very spiritual man. He was born in 1561, lived to 1627, and he established the scientific method of inquiry. So the method of setting forth a hypothesis and then going about and developing evidence to either prove or disprove that, the scientific methodology that we use today was actually developed by a religious man. Blaise Pascal, he was a tremendous mathematician, a physicist, an inventor, and he developed also a lot concerning theology. So here's people that were very religious minded and yet very scientifically oriented too. And I don't believe the two are necessarily have to be opposed one to the other. We also have Michael Faraday. Michael Faraday lived in 1791 to 1867, and he discovered electromagnetic induction. In other words, he developed the first dynamo. Electromagnetism is electricity. And here's Faraday, upon which many of our electrical principles and knowledge and understanding, and the idea of an electrical dynamo and the whole realm of that, was developed by Michael Faraday, a very religious man. We also have Sir Isaac Newton. Now, most people don't think about Sir Isaac Newton as being involved in theology or the study of God, but yet he very much was. He was one of the, if not the greatest mathematicians ever known. He developed an understanding, basic understanding of gravity, of physics, and many other fields. So the fact of the matter is, historical evidence is that nature, the study of nature, the study of the world around us, of science, and the a desire to learn and to know about God do not have to be opposed in any way, shape, or form. So, why do we believe that there's this opposition? Well, I think we've taken the idea of faith or religion or spiritual studies, and we've kind of pushed that into the background, and that's a private matter. Whereas these other things, when we talk about nature and matter and gravity and electromagnetism and chemistry and those things, no, those are fine. We can talk about relationships, we can talk about real life situations. Those are all acceptable. I can approach anybody and talk about friendship. I can talk about the economy. I can talk about weather. But religion, that's okay. You can have your religion, but that's a private matter. And I think we've done our culture has done a great disservice because when you really seek to understand the physical realm, I believe there's a whole other perspective. And that perspective is that rather than just a natural worldview, that there's just matter and nothing more, as we say, matter, chemistry, gravity, electromagnetism, that things just randomly occur. Well, I believe that there's evidence to prove that there is a spiritual realm. And when you take a spiritual worldview, then all of a sudden science now falls into a category where it begins to demonstrate to us, we can see the clear creative intelligence, the work of a designer, the work of a creative being that is behind the physical realm. So now all of a sudden, science takes on the perspective of an investigative tool, not just to see how things work, but where are the fingerprints? What's the evidence that there's intelligence behind this? There's fundamental constraints concerning the world. When I say that, what I mean is that everything, gravity, is defined within a very narrow parameters. If gravity is altered very minutely in its values, its mathematical constants, then life as we know it would cease to exist. The sun would cease to be held together. The earth would cease with molecules and all matter being held together and the attraction between physical objects. These things would change and we wouldn't have a universe the way that we know. The same holds true for electromagnetism. It holds true for many of the things that we see throughout the world around us. The speed of light has been defined within a certain narrow range. We change that and it changes the whole nature of the world. As I mentioned, electromagnetism, the gravitational force, the relationship between mass and energy. These are things which scientists study on a regular basis. They're working to understand the very minute inner workings of matter itself, what holds the electrons, neutrons, protons, quarks, and all of those things together, and what causes them to work the way they do. And what we're finding is that these things are not random. They are very precise. And if altered in the very most minutest way, it would change everything we know, and we as human beings and all life would cease to exist in the way in which we know it. So the fact of the matter is that we do see that if we use science in the way and approach it from both a natural and spiritual worldview, where we see the natural processes and we allow the spiritual worldview behind that, then all of a sudden our eyes are open to the fine tuning of the universe around us and all of these other things that I've just spoken of. Another thing that people commonly refer to as the Big Bang. And I believe that there's significant scientific evidence for, in fact, an initial happening that we call the Big Bang, where all of matter as we know it was condensed at one point and it just erupted out. And as it did, it created time and space and everything we know around it. How can I say this? Because scientifically, we can hear the echoes or the reverberations of that as background noise throughout the universe. We also see the expansion of the universe. But one thing that science has not been able to answer is what was the initiating cause. We have a fundamental law called, cause and effect. For every action, there's a reaction. And this is just a fundamental law of physics. You can't take nothing and create something from it. There has to be an initiating cause. When we have a spiritual worldview, we have the answer for that initiating cause. In fact, it says, that in Genesis, it says, God said, let there be light. The creator being, the designer, whatever God is, he caused it to be. Ron Sandage, who was the protege of Edwin Hubble, he says, science has taken us to the first event, the Big Bang, but it can't take us further to the first cause, the sudden emergence of matter, science, space, time, and energy points to the need for some kind of transcendence. What he is saying is, we see the effects, we can't determine the cause. And no matter how much science tries, it can't get beyond this, what Rex Sandage calls the need for a transcendence. In other words, the need for something, a being, a creator that's behind that initial cause. J.P. Moreland once said, if it's true that there's a beginning to the universe, which we know is true, we see the evidence of that, then this implies a cause that transcends the universe. You see the universe, you see that there's a beginning to it, then it must mean there was something that caused the beginning. If the laws of physics are fine-tuned to permit life, which we know they are, then perhaps there's a designer who fine-tuned them. If there's information in the cell, which we know there is in DNA, then this suggests intelligent design. To get life going in the first place would have required biological information. The implications point beyond the material realm to a prior intelligent cause. In other words, the implication of science and all of our study and all of the work we do actually points to there being a designer or a creator. So naturalism, looking at the world through what's also referred to as materialism, looks at the world as if there's just matter, motion, chemistry, electromagnetism. And the end result is it leaves you with that everything is just an accident. Things have just happened and they've just come together. And that leaves you with the necessary conclusion that your life is meaningless too, because after all, everything was an accident, which means that there is no purpose, there's no reason for our lives. That's a very discomforting place to be. And I think most people realize inside themselves that there is purpose and there is meaning and there is a sense of value to their life. Whereas the spiritual worldview, a deistic worldview, if you would, means that there's an intelligent being behind this, that there was a purpose for what is done, that there's a design and an intelligence embedded in all of the natural order that we see, and that there is value, meaning, and purpose to your life, which the Creator brought together. He had a reason for doing this, and you are part of that reason. And as I said, the spiritual worldview is not opposed to science. It just, I believe, can answer things beyond what the scientific realm can answer, as such as the first cause. What was the cause of life, which science has not answered? And also, what is the meaning, value, and purpose of every individual's life? In Genesis 1:1, we are told in the Bible that God said that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's not opposed to what we're finding scientifically. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And in fact, that would exactly be what we would see as the initial stages of the Big Bang. So if God exists, then God and science can't be opposed, because science is actually the study, the uncovering of the world that God created. Now science becomes a vehicle by which we can discover God. And in the next session, I want to talk about the idea of God and evolution and some of these other things which we may have been taught seem to be opposed to God, which I believe you'll find that really is not the case.